Hey everybody, in this video we're going to talk about in-text citations, paraphrasing, and quoting. So let's take a look. So there's two types of citations. When we use that word citing or citations, there's kind of two types that we're referring to. Cite just means to refer to something else, to a source, to another material. So we cite works in two different places. One, we cite them in the works cited list. So as you can see here, the works cited list appears at the end of the document. It's going to appear at the top of a new page at the very end of your document. We talked about that last week, right? I showed you how to do that for the rhetorical analysis video. So it provides all the need to know information about the sources. So if I wanted to look up this information and I wanted to read what you read to write your paper, I would go to your works cited list and I could find all the information about it. Now, in addition to the works cited list at the end, we also have in-text citations, which appear within the text, hence the name in-text citations, right? So in-text citations are spare, meaning they do not take up too much space. They don't give too much information either. So you can see these ones that are underlined in orange, these are in-text citations in MLA format. Now, in other classes in college, you might encounter other types of formats besides MLA. There's APA format and Chicago style are the two most common. There's also AAAS, there's ASA, there's AMA. Yeah, there's all different types of formats that you may come across in college. So the idea here with learning MLA formatting is not to memorize it so that then you can go forward and do every single thing you ever write forever in the correct format, because some instructors aren't going to want MLA format. They might want a different type of format. So the takeaway from learning MLA format in this class should be that you learn how to tailor whatever document you're creating for a class, to tailor it to the style that your instructor is asking for or to the specifications. So in another class, if you get asked to do APA, you use kind of the same techniques that you use in this class of looking up information using the Purdue OWL, even just going to Google and typing like MLA format works cited, you'll get a lot of examples and easy information to figure out how to format these materials. So again, no one's expecting you to memorize these things. You don't have like a test on MLA formatting or anything like that. But your takeaway should be, okay, when I need to, how do I get the information I need? And then how do I arrange it in the order that it's expected based on the style. So let's start by looking at the works cited list. Now the works cited list appears at the end of the paper, but we should think about it first, and you should be creating your works cited list as soon as you get a material that's going to go into a paper. Just make your works cited entry the very first thing. So in the works cited list, there are multiple entries. So each one of these is called an entry. So entries appear in alphabetical order. And so when you put those into your works cited, let's say you have like 5 sources in a paper, you would not put them in the order they appear in your paper. So let's say, for example, you talk about a source in your first paragraph and then a different source in your second paragraph. You don't necessarily take that source in the first paragraph and make that the first thing in your works cited, and then the second source in the second paragraph, make that your second thing. No, no, no. Depending on whatever word comes at the beginning. So this one, we'll ignore this first one for a second. This is a special case, but so notice beach, brown, burden, Bernie. So each one of these is going in alphabetical order. So we would organize them based on that. This one's technically in alphabetical order too. Ballad comes before beach. When we have the word the, we disregard that for a title. Entries are not enumerated either. So notice there's not number 1, number 2, number 3, number 4 for each one of these sources. So don't put numbers in your works cited list, or notice there's no bullet points or anything like that either. We have what's called a hanging indent, and I'm not sure, I think I might have shown you that last week on the video or not, but we'll take a look at it. So a hanging indent, you'll notice Yeah, I think I did, if I remember correctly. But so you'll notice that I can take my index finger and I can just scroll down this list of sources. And the only, like if I just take my index finger down this area where my mouse is, you can see the only thing that I come across is the very first word. Well, that's important for something like a works cited list because it should be an index of all of the sources that are there. So I should be able to really easily find the one that I'm looking for. So we use that hanging indent where it's flush to the left on the first line, and every subsequent line in an entry is going to be half an inch indented. Like I said before, the works cited list should begin at the top of a fresh page. And notice we've got the words works cited centered at the top. It is not bold text, so it's just regular old text. And notice the whole thing is double spaced. If you have only one entry because you're only quoting one source in your paper or something like that, then it doesn't say works cited, but work cited. Okay, so let's talk about how do we create a works cited entry, and this can get a little bit more detailed, so you'd want to check out the MLA handbook if you have a copy, or you can just use the Purdue OWL. Most of the information from the MLA handbook is provided on the Purdue OWL, and you can find a link to that in the website or in the Canvas page. So notice the first thing that's going to appear is the author's name. And again, this first one's an exception because it doesn't have an author. And so if there is no author, then you just skip it and begin with the title. But notice Horace D. Beach is this person's name. So the last name, the family name, comes first, and then the individual name, the person's name, comes second. One thing about the author name too, if you have a source that has two or more authors, notice that the first person's name is arranged like that, Beach, comma, Horace D, but every other name in the entry is just going to be first last. It's going to be ordinary, Rex A. Lucas. That's maybe confusing because Lucas could be a first name or a last name. Here it is a family name. Take a look at another example down here, Burden, comma, Arnold, and Andrew Safer. So these are two people named Arnold and Andrew, and they wrote this book together. So Arnold Burden and Andrew Safer, this is how it would be written. After the name, you're going to see the title of the source, the chapter, the article, the web page, whatever the thing is. So, so that appears first in this one because there was no author. But here the title is Individual and Group Behavior in a Coal Mine Disaster. Here the title is Blood on the Coal, the story of the Spring Hill mining disasters. So that's going to be the title of the source. Next, if applicable, you'll provide what MLA calls the title of the container. And what that means is sometimes certain sources contain smaller sources within them. So for example, a book contains chapters, and a book gets a title, a chapter gets a title. So the titles need to be kind of like distinguished between an album has a title, but then on the album, each song has a title. And so the song title would appear first, and then the album title would appear second. If you've got an article on a newspaper, then an article in a newspaper or in a magazine, the article title would appear first, and the title of the newspaper or magazine would appear second. If you've got a web page or a website, which you guys might have for this class, that web page is going to go first. That's the individual page on the site, right? And then the website title would go second. So then there's going to be, if you have any translators, editors for like certain types of works, there might be these types of sources or these types of information, then you would provide that information after the title of the container. Let's see, version, volume, and issue numbers, if applicable. You might deal with that later on in college when you're dealing with like academic journal articles. A publication date. So notice we've got 1960 here, 1990, 2011. So these come later on in the entry. And then if applicable, if there's a URL, then you would provide that after the date at the very end. So that's the order in which all your works cited entries will appear. So let's talk about in-text citations. So, and I've got the example up here where it says Learner 24. That's what a typical in-text citation looks like in MLA. So it's going to include the author's name. So here the author's last name is Learner. And then here we've got the page number as well. So 24. It's on page 24 of the source that was written by Learner. So let's take a look at this example, right? See burden and safer 133. So that burden and safer, it tells me where I can locate that entry in the works cited list. So when I want to go find more information about the burden and safer, so let's read this sentence first. Within minutes, a crowd of anxious townspeople had formed at the pit of Spring Hill's number 2 mine, the deepest working mine in North America. Burden and Safer 133. Okay, so if I read that sentence, and as a reader, I'm curious, I want to learn more, I want to access more information about that Spring Hill mine disaster, then I would know that I can find more information about that townspeople gathering. I can find specific information about that on page 133 of the Burden and Safer reference. And to find out what the Burden and Safer reference is, I would just turn to the work cited and look in the index for Burden, Arnold, and Andrew Safer. Okay, The Dramatic Life of a Country Doctor, 50 years, Nimbus Publishing, 2011. So now if I wanted to find this book, I could go to, Barnes & Noble, Amazon, I could go to the library, whatever, and I can get this book now, and I can learn more information about this subject. So that's what we provide in that's why we provide the works cited, but we provide the in-text citation so that the reader can make a really clear connection between this book or whatever source it is, book, web page, etc., and with the sentence in your text that they're getting information from. If there's no author available, which sometimes happens, then you put the first word or words that appear in the entry, which is usually the title. That's what that would appear here. You'll notice here we don't have any examples of that because that's not standard. It's pretty rare when you have a source without an author. But so, for example, this is The Ballad of Spring Hill. If that were in text citation, it would be like parentheses, and inside the parentheses would be quotations, and then the ballad, and that would be enough. You wouldn't have to put the Ballad of Spring Hill. So it's just enough information for that it doesn't clutter up the text, but it's just enough information for the reader to go to the works cited list and find what they need to find. So that's what the first part does, right? That tells you where to find it in the works cited list. But what does the second part do, 24? It tells where to find this within the source itself. So, okay, with Burden and Safer, once I get that book from the library or from Barnes & Noble or from whomever, then when I take a look at it, I know that I need to turn to page 133 to find more information about the crowd of anxious town people. So it'll tell me usually the page number, for paginated sources like books and journal articles. Sometimes it'll be like a line number, and there's specific rules about how to do that if you're doing one for poetry or something like that. But so one thing to be aware of is when you have a website it's not a paginated source, right? When we have like a web page, like a blog entry or something like that, there's not like a page 1, page 2, page 3, page 4, etc. So for sources that are not paginated, like web pages, you don't provide anything in that second spot, and you just provide the author's name for your in-text citation. So you'll cite your source whether you're paraphrasing or quoting directly. So, and we're going to talk about both of those in this video. But so paraphrasing is this first example. Prince Philip made a highly publicized visit to Spring Hill, where he visited the recuperating miners in the hospital. So that information comes from Lerner, the book by Lerner. But those words are not Lerner's words. Those words were rephrased by the author of this paper. To be just so that they would match the style of what this author was writing about. So you can see that's we've got Lerner here, the name of the author, and we've got the page number 162. Let's take a look at the second sentence, though. Shortly after the first group of trapped miners was rescued, the Ed Sullivan Show, America's most popular network program, invited the miners and their wives to appear on air to, quote, commemorate the heroism of the individual, end quote. Burden and Safer 169, period. So the information in that sentence comes from Burden and Safer, and that quote in particular comes from page 169. And so whether you're quoting, like in this example, or whether you're paraphrasing, Doesn't matter which one, you always, always, always provide an in-text citation, because this information is coming from a source. And there's two reasons why we want to do this. One, avoid plagiarism. You do not want to take someone else's research, someone else's ideas, someone else's intellectual property, and present it as though it's your own discovery or your own finding or just information that you happen to know, right? It would not be honest to suggest that. So that's one reason why we need to provide an in-text citation, just for academic integrity and for ethical reasons. A second reason to provide these in-text citations, whether we paraphrase or quote or whatever, we need to provide the in-text citations because we want to provide access for our reader to any of the materials that we're referring to in our paper. And so if I got some really cool information from this Learner article or from this Burden and Safer book, then I want to give my reader the opportunity to find that information easily as well. So if someone's really interested in this Prince Philip visit, but they're not so interested in the Ed Sullivan show, then it would be better for them to know which source they need to go to, rather than having to go through every single source in my list of however many sources, hoping to find something that talks about Prince Philip, right? So now they know. They just have to go to the Learner article, turn to page 162, and that's where it talks about it. So one thing to note with whether it's the quotation or with the paraphrased, notice that the period goes at the very end of everything. And the way that I think about this is, if I put a period here, then that would mean that this parentheses part is the part of the next sentence, right? Because I got a period that finishes my sentence. But since this is part of this sentence, it belongs before the period. So you put your quote into quotes, then you close the quotes, space, open the parentheses, put the author's last name and the page number, close the parentheses, put a period. So note too, even if the original, like in this sentence, maybe there was a period at the end of that sentence, even if there was a period there in the original, you take it out of your quotation. The period should just appear here at the end. So those are standard citations, in-text citations. We also have a variety of in-text citation called a narrative in-text citation. The narrative in-text citation is when you mention the author directly in your sentence. So let's take a look at this example. It starts here. Lerner described miners in romanticized terms as, quote, the strange, hardened men who look death in the eye every working day, close quotes, open parentheses, to close quotes, period. So notice this in-text citation, I still got the author's name and the page number, Lerner and to, but I don't put them in the same place. So that's because in my narrative, in my tale that I'm telling, right, I am including the author's name. So it would be redundant if I said at the end here, Lerner to. So I wouldn't put Lerner to, but it would be incorrect not to include the page number, because I need the page number because I've got a quote or a paraphrase referring to a specific part of the work. So I need to put that page number in parentheses. And that's okay for it to appear by itself in this case, because the reader, it's very clear to the reader that this is coming from the Lerner source. In-text citations only apply to one sentence, so that's something to keep in mind. So let's say you're doing 2 or 3 or 4 sentences in a row and they're all coming from the same source. Does not matter. Put that citation into each of those sentences. It might feel a little cluttered, but it's better to be safe than sorry. In-text citations do not mention titles, only authors. So like we were saying, you just put the author's name. You wouldn't put like the name of the book that he wrote or anything like that in there. We want to keep it clutter-free. There's an exception to that. So if there's no author, like that first one we saw, the ballad of, I forgot what it said, but the ballad example, there's no author there. So then that would be one where we would refer to the title in the in-text citation. If there's multiple sources by the same author, that's an exception too. So you want to check out Purdue OWL for those rare exceptions. But I think for our class, at least, that's not going to happen. Don't include dates, don't include URLs, no years, no HTTP, nothing like that, no www. Don't include any of that in the in-text citation. If you're using a web page as a source, you do not include paragraph numbers. And the only reason I point that out is because in previous editions of MLA, you did use paragraph numbers. So if you learned this in a previous class or something, that's no longer required for MLA 8th edition. Do not use superscript or footnotes. So it looks kind of like this, number 1, source number 2, source number 3 at the end of each sentence. There are some formatting styles and citation styles that require superscript numbers like that. Chicago style is the most famous one, which you might use in a history or philosophy class, but you will not use it for MLA formatting or for APA formatting if you decide to do that one. Okay, I'm going to take a break for a moment.